Welcome to LOA Today. Walt and Anne-Marie McEwen here on this Sunday. It's November the 25th. Wow, 2018. 8 p.m. New York time, 5 p.m. Los Angeles time, 1 a.m. London time, and that would make it 12 noon Sydney, Australia time. I mean, I looked at that date, Anne-Marie, just now, the 25th. I mean, I know we're past Thanksgiving, but that just kind of like sticks you like, we're almost at the done of 2018. We're almost at the end of the year, right?
I
And
know.
that,
It's
that
crazy.
that's what stuck with me. Like, wow, that year just went. I mean, I say this every year. Maybe I should really stop saying that. Maybe I should start saying the year goes slowly and it'll go slowly, right? Because that's the law of attraction, right?
Well, you
So,
can say it, but what are you really feeling?
well, I gotta feel it too, and it's appropriate you say that because we're going to be doing some Neville today. Neville's the one who, of course, says you have to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Well, so if I want the years to go slowly, I got to assume the feeling of it. So I'm going to think back to when, I was a kid and it was June and I was wondering, what decade Christmas was going to show up in. Right?
Yes.
It's crazy.
Well, I think time is speeding up, but I have no proof of that myself. So
Okay.
I'm not a
Well,
scientist. But anyway.
we'll make that our working theory for the day.
Okay, we'll wait on
But
that.
anyway, we are going to be doing we're talking a little bit of Neville because Anne-Marie loved some of the conversations that Cindy Chavez and I were having on the subject. And I have to admit, I'm getting into Neville more and more. There are still parts of Neville that give me a hard time. In fact, I got this book that Cindy has, Power of Imagination, where Neville's collection of his 10 main books. And I've been reading stuff from the book today that Cindy and I haven't covered, and some of it just kind of gives me a hard time, but it also helps to have had exposure to Cindy's Neville Decoder ring because that definitely makes it a lot easier.
Yes, yes. Having her, who's been reading it for what, like 10 years, is
Yeah,
definitely a help. Yeah.
it does.
So
And,
maybe we
and
can do a little reading and discuss it.
yeah, yeah. Well, you do get the sense after a while that the way Neville uses concepts is quite different than the way they're usually used. And in many ways, they are more consistent, shall we say? I mean, let's when I say consistent, I mean consistent with the way the words that we use usually, or not usually, used to historically, originally, etymologically, what they used to mean. When you take it that way, his stuff starts to make more sense. It starts to be more like what you and I would understand as law of attraction rather than what Jerry Falwell would think was Christian or something like that. It's just it becomes an entirely different animal at that point. And I still wonder. I mean, I know that Neville really is not accepted in most traditional religious circles, and I can tell why. I'm wondering how much of that was just because they don't know about him, or how much of it was because they just couldn't stand what he was saying. I imagine part of it was the latter.
Yeah. I mean,
You
some
know,
of the stuff that he says just is like the Bible is just not historically accurate and
Mm,
none of the people are real and it's
yeah,
just all stories made up to, allegories and stuff. And I'm like, geez, I don't even know if I can buy that. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. But I'm learning more and more about the meanings of things. So I'm
mm,
at least I'm open to the possibility.
hmm,
And some things make it a lot easier to understand when he's talking about consciousness and unconsciousness and some of the things in the Bible about men and women and all that stuff. It just makes it easier for me to accept. So
sure, yeah.
I'm
No,
I'm all ears.
you're all ears. Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you that we are going to go a little bit beyond just doing Neville because we're also kind of opening it up tonight. We're going to invite people who are tuning in to the Facebook group, Law of Attraction Changed My Life, listening to the live stream of this podcast recording. And if anyone is tuning in, we do have people who are tuning in, but if there's anyone tuning in who has questions or ideas or concepts or thoughts or just plain comments that they want to share, we want to encourage you guys to do that because that's part of what the impetus is behind the show. We don't want this to be just about us. We want this to be about the law of attraction and how it applies to the lives of everybody, all of our listeners, our growing listener audience.
Yeah,
And we
and
do already
sharing.
have people greeting us, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, and
Um,
sharing our thoughts and sharing perceptions because
Absolutely.
you hear other people's perceptions and it helps to open yours.
Yep. So we already have a couple of hellos from Jamie, who's one of the administrators of the group, and Nasha, who's one of our good friends and loyal listener. She's one of our best listeners, I have to say. She's just really in our corner, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's great. That's great.
Um, and we have about a half dozen people who are listening live. So hello, everybody. And as you listen in and you are hearing what we're talking about, we ask you to feel free to share your comments, share your questions, especially questions. We like having questions because they're fun. We're a panel of two, and we don't know the answers to everything, but we'll we'll be happy to share what we know. And hey, you may have some insights for us too, which will be even better as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But the conscious and the subconscious is something that Cindy and I spent quite a bit of time on one particular episode, a couple months back, I think it was. But really interesting concept because, like you say, the way Neville approaches biblical teaching, and indeed the way he approaches his subject, is completely metaphorical. And that is a bit of a challenge to many people. Interestingly enough, and I don't want to get too much down a rabbit hole here, so I'll just only go so far with it. But in my experience, no matter who I've spoken to who is what I would call a self-described devout Christian, if I get into their mind, so to speak, get a sense of where they're coming from, which is usually where their particular church is coming from, where their pastor or their priest or whatever is coming from, and learn how they understand stuff that's in the Bible, I find that virtually everybody engages in metaphor. It's just a question of which metaphor and which ones are you accepting and which ones are you rejecting, and to what extent. There are even people who believe that the Bible is literally true, and yet
Oh,
I
yeah.
find even among them, they still engage in metaphor. They just don't always recognize it. So it's one of those. It's kind of a slippery slope thing, because it really comes down to what your interpretation is, or what your priest's interpretation, or your pastor's interpretation, your minister's interpretation, whatever interpretation it is that's governing your thought process. Interpretation plays a big role. So in that context, plus, I mean, I have my own background with the church that has always left me feeling a little cold anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not a big leap to engage in the idea that the Bible is metaphor, or the understanding the Bible as metaphor, because I mean, really, metaphor just governs the way that everybody that I know of that I've ever met understands the Bible one way or
Yeah.
another. It's just a question of what metaphor you're going to follow, really.
And how much of it is metaphor? I mean, I think that it's one thing to say, there's God and there's Jesus and there's Mary and there's the disciples, and they talk about things and subjects and uh, concepts and beliefs, and they use metaphors and they use
Mm-hmm.
parables and things like that to describe what they're trying to talk about, the concept that they're trying to talk about. But to take it that next step and say that Jesus himself and God and Mary and all the people in the Bible are also metaphors for larger concepts, I think that's another level that
Oh, it's
most
definitely another
Christians would
level.
not go to.
No,
I mean,
that's farther than most people are willing to go. This is true.
yeah.
Very
So
true.
I'm still, I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't unloaded all that yet.
Well, I have to say I'm past the point where I'm really concerned about that personally, but I do understand how that affects a lot of people. For me, it's more about, can I get a handle on what the heck he's saying? If I can do that much, I figure I'm doing pretty darn good. And that's the way I've been kind of approaching it when I've been doing the shows with Cindy, because otherwise, I mean, you can't make sense out of it unless you have a playbook to find out what the heck he's talking about,
Right.
because his metaphors are really, really wild.
Right.
But they're
And then
good. They're interesting.
sometimes I say, well, I don't really know if it matters too much to me what it is that I believe about specifically all that, as long
Hmm.
as I can understand enough to make my life work for me and make my life uh, meaningful to me, and find purpose in my life and find the tools that I need in my life to make it work for me. So if I want to achieve something, I want to learn how to achieve it, and what are the
Hmm.
tools that I need to use to achieve it. So understanding more about the imagination and the conscious and subconscious helps me to achieve that. So that's why I want to learn more about it, because you can say something in your mind about a goal that you have. Let's say I want to lose weight. Well, you can say that I want to lose weight, but if you have underlying beliefs that you're not good enough and you have to, or you're afraid of something, and by eating it helps you be not afraid, let's say, then and eating is your mechanism to preserve yourself, then you're just going to keep eating until you get to the root of the problem and dissolve that belief that you need to eat. And so you have to find those underlying issues. And I'm not sure I've done that. I'm not sure I've, gone back and either through meditation or whatever to uncover those subconscious beliefs that I have. And that may be something that I need to do. I don't know. So not that my life is really bad. My life is great. I love my life, but there's certainly things that I want to accomplish still. So who knows?
Well, we've certainly stimulated conversation because we're already getting comments in the Facebook group. So
Oh, that's good.
before we go any further, I want to share some of them. Nasha says, well, first of all, Nasha's raising some interesting questions. She says, okay, we all know we should focus on the good, but honestly, how do we pay no heed to them? Them, I'm not sure who them is yet. Does practice make perfect, and how to make oneself strong enough? And unfortunately, the way this thing works, I just lost the rest of her comments, so I can't read the rest of it. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
So hang on to that one. Jamie's saying, and I'm not sure if I've got this right, the lick log seems to be a Christian's belief in a power outside of oneself. Neville clearly says there is no power outside of self, and there's a big difference in that. That's true. That's a big portion of what Neville has to say, that it's all inside. It's all internal.
Right. And not only Neville, but Abraham and any other teacher that I know or that I've studied talks about the power being within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Herbert asks, why can't your mind allow you to see beyond? Well, I think that's also what Neville's talking about. He's saying, look beyond what's the physical reality, what's the reality that we're experiencing. So that's precisely where Neville's going with this, because he's essentially saying, don't get trapped in what's going on in reality, look beyond it.
Right.
Nasha says, I think Neville means a lot deeper than that. I thought it was a blasphemy before, but after watching What the Bleep Do We Know, I think he means it totally in a different way. And yeah, that's something Cindy and I have explored too. It's an interesting question too, because the whole concept regarding quantum physics and all that go around that, which people like us in the New Thought movement, in the law of attraction circles, refer to regularly in ways that quantum physicists themselves don't normally want to go to. We are exploring stuff that had been basically released to the public 20 years before Neville started doing his preaching, giving his talks. And I've wondered, I haven't seen any evidence one way or another, but I've wondered how informed was Neville about what, say, Einstein had been saying, or what some of the people following Einstein had said. Was he following those discussions? I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I keep looking for it. And Nasha's throwing a whole bunch of concepts at us. Herbert says not such a thing as good or bad. Yeah, that's also an interesting point. Neville doesn't actually talk much about good or bad, does he? He's not talking about good and evil at all. He's talking about how to utilize the law of the universe, which he describes it in a number of different ways. We would call it the law of attraction, and using that law to basically manifest what you want to manifest, how to have the God power, so to speak, and how to use that God power. So It's not about good or bad. It's what do we choose? What are we individually choosing? So I have to agree with him on that.
Right.
And then Nasha says the people who say hurting stuff, and then she laughs at that. That's what I mean by them. Okay, the concept of God is what the bleep do we know makes perfect. Okay, so we've already stimulated a lot of conversation here. This is good. I'm not even sure that we're going to try to answer all the questions, except we'll see if we can explore our own answers, and maybe some of those answers will match up with some of the questions people are raising, because people are raising questions here. We could do an entire show on each one of those questions that they've raised. So I may have bit off more than I choose when I said, let's take it beyond these questions and see what we could do with them. Those are all great questions that you guys are raising.
All right, well, let's start at the top and go down and talk about them. You want to?
Okay. Well, the best source that I know of for the topic of the conscious and the subconscious, which is the one that you suggested we talk about, is his book from 1944, Feeling is the Secret. And anyone who doesn't have a copy of that book, there's actually a website that you can reference, feelingisthesecret.org. It has the complete text of the book. So if you don't have the book in front of you and you want to be able to read along with us, there's a good place to just pick it up really quickly. Oh, and Jamie has another comment. Neville's teacher Abdullah refers to a reference to good versus bad as having quibbles. Yes, that's right. I'd forgotten that, but you're right. Exactly correct.
Having
It's all
quibbles, huh?
quibbles. It's all just quibbling.
It's all just good. Well, like I was trying to explain to my granddaughter who's 5 the other day, I was like, nothing is inherently good or bad. It all depends on how you see it, how you
Hmm.
perceive it, and what you make of it is whether you determine whether it's good or bad to you. But it
Hmm.
may be good or bad to you, but different to somebody else, you know? So
Hmm.
it's all what we make of it. But anyway, shall we go to the book?
Let's go to the book. So most of his discussion is actually in the first chapter of this book. And so I'm just going to read a little bit here. And when I get to the point where I've said something that needs a little discussion, just jump right in and we'll discuss it.
Great.
The first chapter is called Law and Its Operation. And it says, the world and all within it is man's conditioned consciousness objectified. Consciousness is the cause as well as the substance of the entire world. So it is to consciousness that we must turn if we would discover the secret of creation. Knowledge of the law of consciousness and the method of operating this law will enable you to accomplish all you desire in life. Armed with a working knowledge of this law, you can build and maintain an ideal world. Consciousness is the one and only reality, not figuratively, but actually. This reality may, for the sake of clarity, be likened unto a stream, which is divided into two parts, the conscious and the subconscious. In order to intelligently operate the law of consciousness, it is necessary to understand the relationship between the conscious and the subconscious. The conscious is personal and selective. The subconscious is impersonal and non-selective. The conscious is the realm of effect. The subconscious is the realm of cause. These two aspects are the male and female divisions of consciousness. The conscious is male, the subconscious is female. The conscious generates ideas and impresses these ideas on the subconscious. The subconscious receives ideas and gives form and expression to them. That becomes a pretty significant theme with him, dividing not just consciousness into conscious and subconscious, but labeling them as male and female, which is an interesting way to approach the topic. There's actually a purpose for it that he makes clear later on. But the first time I read this, I said, well, that's an interesting way to describe it. I wonder why he's doing that.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that really jumped out at me when he was in one of the YouTubes I was listening to talking about the male and the female as conscious and subconscious and talking about the Bible verses.
Hmm.
And I believe it was in Mark talking about how, uh, this female needs to be subjective to the husband
Hmm.
um, and the relationship between male and female in the Bible,
Hmm.
and how that correlates here, I thought was really fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's a little bit confusing because we have a tendency to want to take it literally. And we have to
Right,
remember everything he says is metaphorical. So in this case, the metaphor is kind of like the equivalent of electrical outlets. There's the male plug and there's the female jack, right? So you plug in the male to the female. It's not sexual in any sense other than there are two components
right,
to the way the whole thing works.
right,
And
right,
it's important to maintain that perspective because otherwise it can get really confusing really, really fast.
right. And that's where I think the Bible is more metaphorical than at least I, as a Catholic, and was raised to believe,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's where I think a lot of us go wrong is thinking that it's so literal, and
Hmm.
it's not.
Hmm. Yep. Lots of arguments have gotten started on that one.
Right, right. I'm
A
sure.
whole lot of them.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
He makes the comment later on. I don't want to skip around too much here, but in the same chapter, he makes the comment about, I'm not sure if I can spot it quickly, about how it is not he describes the conscious being sort of the head and the subconscious, the female, being the follower, so to speak. But he says it's not in the sense of one dominating the other, it's rather in the sense of a lover. And I think that's why he uses this metaphor, because he's talking
Right,
about it as being a co-creation, as the two working together,
right,
nominally being in charge, but only nominally.
right. Well, it's kind of like one has to listen, one listens to the other, and yeah, it's very confusing. Yeah.
And there's also the initiation side. I mean, we talk about the conscious being male, the subconscious being female. In most often in sexual relations, it's usually male initiation. Well, there's also that part you can carry over too. The idea that the ideas start in the conscious mind, get transformed or seeded, if you will, a seed implanted into the subconscious mind, and then the subconscious mind is where all the creation takes place. So
Right.
one initiates to the other. So that's probably also part of where the metaphor comes in, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would
Anyway,
think so.
continue. Oh, I should check to see what else we've got people saying here. Nothing dramatically new, so I'll keep going. By this law, first conceiving an idea and then impressing the idea conceived on the subconscious, all things evolve out of consciousness. And without this sequence, there is not anything made that is made. That's one of the things that's really interesting about Neville. He talks biblical. He
Yes.
combines phrases and uses the same word in different ways in the same sentence and so forth. He talks biblical, and it can be very confusing to follow that. I mean,
Right.
in this case, like I think I've got it. This sequence, there is not anything made that is made. I mean, okay, he's just repeating the word twice to mean the same thing, so he's not saying anything really spectacular or unusual. But it's a little bit disorienting when you first run into that mode of speaking.
Right.
Anyway, continuing, it says the conscious impresses the subconscious while the subconscious expresses all that is impressed upon it. Subconscious does not originate ideas, but accepts as true those which the conscious mind feels to be true, keyword there, feels, and in a way known only to itself, objectifies the accepted ideas. That's another word. Cindy and I didn't talk about that one too much, but he uses that word objectifies in a very specific way. He literally, this is one of the times he's actually literal. He is not using it metaphorically. He means turns into an object. He means turns into objective reality. And that's
Hmm.
where you're used to this idea. Okay, we're going to go into metaphor here. Everything's going to be a metaphor, and then all of a sudden he introduces a real concept, and it just kind of throws you a little bit. But the way
That's
I see it
interesting.
is
So,
he's using that specifically.
so you're saying he turns the feelings into ideas.
Hmm. But more specifically, well, let me read the sentence again. The subconscious does not originate ideas, but accepts as true those which the conscious mind feels to be true, and in a way known only to itself, objectifies the accepted ideas. So the subconscious takes the
So,
ideas that were originated in the conscious mind, and in a way only known to the subconscious mind, it turns them into objects. That's literally what I think he's saying here.
yeah, I think what he's saying is that he takes the subconscious takes the ideas through the feelings and does not judge them as being good or bad. To
Right.
me, that's how I interpret it is it's not making it good or bad. It's just saying, okay, these are just the ideas and
So you would
accepts them as true, whether they were whatever they were before, it just takes them as true and doesn't
So you're,
judge them.
you're taking the word objectify to mean objective, as in an objective viewpoint.
Right, as objectively. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I would read that, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, that would certainly carry the metaphorical theme, but I really do think he's got the other theme going on there, and it shows up a
Possibly.
lot. It shows up a lot. Every time that I've seen it, he always seems to be tying it to the process whereby the subconscious mind begins what he calls the hardening process. Cindy and I have talked about that, how the
Right.
idea hardens into reality.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah. And
you
not
always find the
judging
word
it, but creating.
objectifies there. Yeah.
Yeah. No. No. You're probably right there.
Therefore, through his power to imagine and feel and his freedom to choose the idea he will entertain, man has control over creation. Control of the subconscious is accomplished through control of your ideas and feelings. So, very much a law of attraction idea going on there.
Oh yeah.
Um, this whole idea of the control of the subconscious is how we accomplish control of our ideas and feelings. That's almost out of Abraham, word for word.
Right.
The mechanism of creation is hidden in the very depth of the subconscious, the female aspect or womb of creation. The subconscious transcends reason and is independent of induction. Okay, that's where you have to really slow down. It contemplates a feeling as a fact existing within itself, and on this assumption proceeds to give expression to it. The creative process begins with an idea, and its cycle runs its course as a feeling and ends in a volition to act. So, okay, let's take that one apart, because that's got a
Yes.
little bit going on there.
Yes.
Um, Okay, so going back to the first sentence, that we're carrying on a theme that we're familiar with there. The mechanism of creation is hidden in the very depth of the subconscious, the female aspect or womb of creation. Okay, so the idea has been planted in the subconscious. The subconscious transcends reason. I'm not sure why transcends. It's an interesting choice of words. And is
Mm.
independent of induction. So let's talk about what that means. Induction is the reverse of deduction, right? Deduction is where I start with A and I grab B and A and B infer C. So A and B have proven C, and now that I know that C is true, I can say that D is true. I can prove my way down deductively, like Sherlock Holmes does deduction or Hercule
Hmm.
Poirot does deduction. Whereas
Okay.
inducing, is reversing the process. Induction is starting with what the conclusion is and working your way backwards and trying to figure out what the prior steps are.
So then he's saying independent of that, meaning he's just looking at uh, the end product and not looking at anything else. Is that right?
I think so. I think that's where he's going. That's why I tried to define induction the way I always understood the word to mean to see does it actually fit. The subconscious transcends reason and is independent of induction.
Well, I think it answers our question because then it says it contemplates a feeling as fact. So
Hmm.
I think right there it's saying that it looks at that feeling and takes that feeling as almost like the end product, like the feeling is it.
Hmm.
And it doesn't look at anything else. It doesn't look at why you got there or how you got there or
Hmm.
judging it as good or bad. It just takes that feeling as it is.
Hmm. Right. And we're getting some confirmations from our audience too. Jamie and Herbert are both agreeing. Yep, we're on track. So,
Okay, cool.
so good to know we're not spinning out of control yet. That could still
Yeah,
happen.
right.
Okay. So he contemplates a feeling as a fact existing within itself, and on this assumption proceeds to give expression to it. Boy, he has some strange ways of expressing things. The creative process begins with an idea, and its cycle runs its course as a feeling and ends in a volition to act. That sounds familiar to us again, and both in Abraham terms and in Neville terms, the idea that the feeling precedes the thing actually coming into truth, into reality.
Manifestation, right.
Manifestation. Ideas are impressed on the subconscious through the medium of feeling. No idea can be impressed on the subconscious until it is felt, but once felt, be it good, bad, or indifferent, it must be expressed. The key word expressed, hang on to that one.
So
Feeling
that's
is the
interesting, yeah.
Feeling is the one and only medium through which ideas are conveyed to the subconscious. Therefore, the man who does not control his feeling may easily impress the subconscious with undesirable states. Yeah, we all know that one. I mean, how many times do we manifest things that we didn't really want to manifest? This is how we do it. Exactly. By
Right.
just not maintaining that control. Um, by control of feeling is not meant restraint or suppression of your feeling, but rather the disciplining of self to imagine and entertain only such feeling as contributes to your happiness.
Boy, wouldn't it be great if more people understood that?
It would be
I
great
think,
if I completely understood that, to be perfectly honest.
well, and to understand is one thing, but to do is another.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so many people want to just talk about their misery and talk about all the
Hmm.
bad things that happened and complain and commiserate, and it just doesn't get us anywhere. It's just so counterproductive and not conducive to what we really want. And people just don't get that. So I really wish people could learn that and do that. So,
I don't even wish other people would, although I wish that I would learn that better. That's my goal, is just learning that. Because well, the first part I had to go through, and I think many people have had to go through, by controlling a feeling is not meant restraint or suppression of your feeling. Well, that's what I was doing for years. I was restraining and suppressing my feeling. Okay, then I learned to let it out. But once I let it out, now it was all over the place. I mean, there was just no real sense
yeah,
of intent, direction, and so
no
forth.
discipline with it, right?
No discipline, and even that word discipline, I kind of cringe at, because even that word just doesn't feel correct, right? But he uses the word here, so we'll go with it. He
Hmm.
says, but rather the disciplining of self to imagine and entertain only such feelings as contributes to your happiness. And I would get my Neville decoder ring out, and I would translate that to, but rather by focusing with intention to imagine and entertain only such feelings as contribute to my happiness. Because when I look at it that way, that to me seems the more positive way to do it. The other way, the way he's describing it, that I mean, maybe I'm picking at nits here. To me, that's the way you get into the mistake of suppressing your feelings. Because when you're disciplining yourself, you're applying like a minor penalty. Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, and you're just pushing your feelings right back down again. Whereas when you're saying, I'm going to intently focus, now you're expressing it in a positive form. So I always try to turn around and turn it into the positive form whenever I can, because I think it's a more direct route. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I think that's fine, but I think that it's important to note there when you're talking about disciplining, there's I almost think that there's two aspects to disciplining. One, disciplining is like scolding and like
Mhm.
you were saying, don't do this, and that's disciplining. And then there's also the other aspect of disciplining, which is just to uh, sort of keep yourself in check. Create a plan for yourself and keep yourself in check, and be disciplined yourself, not so much to discipline yourself, but to just stay in the boundaries of what you set up. If you say you want to wake up at 8 o'clock every day, then you get up at 8 o'clock every day. And by being disciplined, you can maintain that schedule of getting up at 8 o'clock every day. Whereas if you just say, I'm going to get up at 8 o'clock every day, and then you never do it, well, then you're not being very disciplined, right?
We've got a lot of people weighing in here, and I'm not sure I can catch all the comments that have been coming through. But the last few, Jamie says discipline equals to train. Cindy provided a link. I can't follow the link right now, so I'll have to look at that one later on. And Herbert had a comment that just went out of the way, but it said, the last part of it said, we don't look at the subconscious. He says discipline brings on a negative thought. And that's kind of where I was going with it. Disciplining can bring on a negative thought, and so the question is, do you really want to be focusing on the negative thought? It's kind of like what the similarity is between gratitude and appreciation. And Abraham points out, appreciation is actually a slightly higher vibration than gratitude. Gratitude's good. Gratitude's very good because it's one of the easiest ways to get ourselves into a better feeling place quickly, just by
Right,
expressing gratitude for just like the basic things we have in life, the people who are in
right.
our lives, whatever it might be. Um, but that appreciation is higher because gratitude also tends to have a little bit of an extra piece to it. That you should be grateful for what you've got. There's something wrong with you if you're not grateful. But
Well,
nobody ever says there's something wrong with you if you're not appreciative. That never gets tagged onto it.
well, I think to me, how I understood it is gratitude is the feeling that you get after you've looked at what you don't want. It gratitude involves contrast. Because of
Hmm.
contrast, you're allowed to feel gratitude, or another way to say it is because of the contrast that exists, we can feel gratitude.
Hmm.
Because it's when you look at what you don't have, then or when you look at something you don't want, and you feel the thing that you now have. Oh, I'm so grateful it's sunny out because it was raining before. And
Hmm.
that's gratitude. Whereas appreciation is pure, like Abraham says, pure bliss.
Hmm.
And it has nothing to do with the contrast of what happened before or something else that exists. It's just pure appreciation. And there's no contrast within that thought or
Hmm.
that feeling at all.
Yeah.
To me, that's how I differentiate it.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's a valid way to differentiate it. I think the main point, and this is, we're really kind of picking at nits here. I've said that before, and I'll reemphasize it again. There's not a huge difference between disciplining yourself to maintain your focus and focusing with intent. The difference there is so slight that it's not even worth looking at in some ways. I just point out that I like to go for the one that's a little bit better feeling. That's all. But it's still
well,
picking at
that's
it.
good. If it feels better to you, do it.
If it feels better, it feels better. That's all there is to
That's
it.
great.
Let's see. So picking up again, where were we? Control of your feeling is all important to a full and happy life. Never entertain an undesirable feeling or think sympathetically about wrong in any shape or form. Well, so he actually does make reference to right and wrong here, but he does it kind of indirectly. He says, don't give any sympathetic attention to wrong in any shape or form. Do not dwell on the imperfection of yourself or others. Oh, boy, that's a good piece of advice. How often do we do that?
Oh,
Like
really?
daily, hourly? Oh, and we do it in ways that we don't even recognize so often.
That's true.
To do so is to impress the subconscious with these limitations. Exactly. What you do not want done unto you, do not feel that it is done unto you or another. This is the whole law of a full and happy life. Everything else is commentary. Okay.
I
Yeah,
love that one. I love that
it's
one. It's
good.
kind of like the golden rule in a
Right.
different, just with a different slant on it. And
Yes.
he's like,
Yeah,
that's everything, and everything
that's
else is just,
it.
oh,
Welcome
killer.
to Panacea. That's good. That's really good. Um, let's see. Oh, Herbert's been commenting like crazy. Disciplining brings on a negative thought. He says exactly. I think he's referring to our little discussion. Intent has a more positive thought process. Yeah, I think so. I think that's true.
Yeah.
Every feeling makes a subconscious impression, and unless it is counteracted by a more powerful feeling of an opposite nature, it must be expressed. The dominant of two feelings is the one expressed. I am healthy is a stronger feeling than I will be healthy. To feel I will be is to confess I am not. That's a good point. I am is stronger than I am not. Yeah, that kind of makes me feel better because that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to express it in terms of what is rather than what isn't. And that I still believe, I think that's a good habit to get into. I'm going to try to get into it even more. When you feel you are always, I'm sorry, what you feel you are always dominates what you feel you would like to be. Therefore, to be realized, the wish must be felt as a state that is rather than a state that is not. So, yeah, continuing that same thought.
Hmm.
Sensation precedes manifestation and is the foundation upon which all manifestation rests. This is the beginning of his introduction of his primary concept, assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, I think.
Hmm.
Because very often we have lots of teachers, including Abraham, although Abraham does emphasize the feeling portion. But for the most part, we emphasize the visual part, the part that we can see, the part that we can, objectively spot in some way. We tend less often to think about the feeling part, and feeling being two different kinds of feelings, the emotional feeling or just the touch feeling, the touch sensation or the taste or the sound or the smell or whatever it might be. The point is, we don't tend to think about that quite so much, and that's a big thing with Neville, because Neville really wants us to get into the idea of what's the sensation of whatever this scene is or this thing
Right.
is that we're trying to manifest.
Right.
So
Right.
this is where I think he's introducing it first. Sensation precedes manifestation and is the foundation upon which all manifestation rests. Be careful of your moods and feelings, for there is an unbroken connection between your feelings and your visible world. Your body is an emotional filter, interesting phrase, and bears the unmistakable marks of your prevalent emotions. Emotional disturbances, especially suppressed emotions, are the causes of all disease. I believe that more and more, actually. I've
Oh
gotten to the
yeah.
point now where I've bought into that idea.
Hmm.
To feel intensely about a wrong without voicing or expressing that feeling is the beginning of a disease, dis-ease, in both body and environment. So do not entertain the feeling of regret or failure, for frustration or detachment from your objective results in disease. Yeah. Well, if I didn't have enough incentive before to try to focus only on what I want and not what I don't want, I think he just gave me one more reason. Stay away from the disease by focusing on what you want and not on what you don't want. Even
Hmm.
if you do it in a backhanded way, you're still focusing on what you don't want.
Hmm. Right.
Or as Herbert says, it's positive versus negative. Yeah, you're finding a positive thought. Jamie says it's the golden rule. Yep, exactly right. Let's see. Think feelingly only of the state you desire to realize. Feeling the reality of the state sought and living and acting on that conviction is the way of all seeming miracles. All changes of expression are brought about through a change of feeling. A change of feeling is a change of destiny. All creation occurs in the domain of the subconscious. What you must acquire then is a reflective control of the operation of the subconscious. That is, control of your ideas and feelings. So clearly he's talking about more than, I mean, the whole dance of conscious versus subconscious, and we were talking earlier about the gender metaphor and all of that. He's actually gone now way beyond that gender metaphor, I think. He's talking now more specifically about basically taking control of our subconscious mind. And I keep remembering what he says about how the conscious and the subconscious are really just two streams of one thing, that one thing being the conscious mind. But he's talking about how through the conscious we are actually directly taking control of the subconscious mind. And I don't know that's where the gender metaphor gets a little bit difficult for me. So that's why I'm saying we're kind of beyond that at that point. I mean, maybe you feel differently, but to me that's where it's starting to get a little bit because otherwise we have to start getting into realms of gender and sexuality that I don't even want to go to. So,
Yeah, I don't understand it all, honestly. Yeah, the whole gender thing is really tricky.
it's very tricky, and I won't even say more about that. It's just to say where that was going metaphorically, I just want to stay away from. So, chance or accident is not responsible for the things that happen to you, nor is predestined fate the author of your fortune or misfortune. Your subconscious impressions determine the conditions of your world. The subconscious is not selective, it is impersonal, and no respecter of persons. What a strange phrasing. It is not a respecter of persons. The subconscious is not concerned with the truth or falsity of your feeling. It always accepts as true that which you feel to be true. Feeling is the assent of the subconscious to the truth of that which is declared to be true. Oh, okay, now we're really getting confusing here.
I think that he says the same thing over and over and
He
over
does.
again, just in different words.
He does. He does a lot of that. And not just within a chapter. From book to book, he's saying the same things over and over and over.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's almost like I know that his background, he was an actor. He was an
Hmm.
actor, and I believe, well, he did very well while he was on the stage, and then he left the stage when he developed his interest in mysticism. So he stopped being an actor, and I think he actually worked in department stores. I'm not sure of that exactly. But my point is that through his acting background, he had learned a lot about how not just how the subconscious and conscious minds work together, but how, as an actor, to assume feelings,
Right.
how powerful that is, how you can create characters when you can do that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so he was trying to find ways to introduce to an audience of people who were not actors the feelings that he had kind of arrived at them intuitively. He had arrived at these concepts in a very intuitive way, and he had found through, I think, through personal experience of trying to explain what that was like to just regular people in conversation, that he had to keep going at it in a variety of different ways. So I think he did the same thing in his lectures. I mean,
Hmm.
that this is
Yeah.
speculation on my part because I can't really say for sure, but that's my sense of him that he was trying to help people understand what he just got. He just got it as an actor. As an actor, he could do these things very, very easily, and he was helping
Right.
people through any way he could get there to be able to learn to do the same things that he was doing.
Right. Right. No, I'd have to agree with that. Yeah.
Jamie points out he does repeat, so does Abraham Hicks. No kidding. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Abraham is another one. Oh my goodness. The same thing over and over again. I've told this one before, but it was back when I first bought Asking It Is Given. It was the first Abraham book that I bought.
Me
And I
too.
was looking at is it your first two? I had done my due diligence as I usually do when I'm checking out a book for the first time. So I went to Amazon and I checked out the reviews. And I always check out what the negative reviews are, even if it's a book I really do want to buy, just to see what is it that people are objecting to the most. Because it
Uh-huh.
gives me an idea of, okay, what am I really dealing with here? And this one guy wrote um, that the book is a waste of money. He says, I can tell you in one sentence what this is all about. Whatever you focus on is what you get into your life. There, I just saved you 15 bucks. And you know what? When you read the book through for the first time, that's the message you get over and over and over again. It isn't until you read it the second and the third time that you realize that there are nuances going on that you miss completely the first time through.
Hmm.
And that's what I think I'm finding more and more with Neville. The same thing that I found with Abraham. With Abraham, the more that I read it, the more I listened to the lectures, the more I listened to the YouTubes, all that kind of stuff, the more I began to realize there was a lot of depth there that I just missed the first time around.
Hmm.
And I'm getting the sense that the same thing is true with Neville. I can't say I've totally um, plumbed the depths yet, but
Yeah. No, I totally think that it's a lot deeper than I have even scratched the surface of. Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. So we have to kind of take the fact that he keeps saying the same thing over and again with a grain of salt and say, okay, what else is going on in here? Because I think there's something else.
Right.
Okay, so let's see. Let's pick this up. Blah, blah, blah.
It's
Feeling
right
is the
up.
ascent. I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead. I was just gonna. I'm following along and reading it online as well. So
Oh, okay. I think
yeah.
this is where I left it. Feeling is the ascent of the subconscious to the truth of that which is declared to be true. Oh, I know. I wanted to go back to that previous sentence. It always accepts as true that which you feel to be true.
Hmm.
And I said this is where Neville starts losing me with his, the way he repeats concepts within concepts.
Yeah.
Um, the subconscious is not concerned with the truth or falsity of your feeling. It always accepts as true that which you feel to be true. And when you
Yeah.
read it
Yeah.
more carefully, what you realize that he's talking about the truth of reality and the truth of feeling and how one influences the other. But when you first read it, it's like, huh? What are you talking about? Feeling is the assent of the subconscious to the truth of that which is declared to be true. Yeah, so he said the same thing again. He just made it more complex.
You're right.
Because of this quality of the subconscious, there is nothing impossible to man. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and feel as true, the subconscious can and must objectify. There's that word objectify again. Notice every
Hmm.
time he talks about that subconscious doing its work, objectify is always in there.
You're right. Right.
Your feelings create the pattern from which your world is fashioned, and a change of feeling is a change of pattern. Now, I just want to double check where we are in this. Okay. And yeah, we're not going to get through the whole chapter. This is typical the way it works with Cindy too. We
No.
never get through
Right.
the whole
Right.
chapter.
Right. Right.
But we are getting into the depth of what he talks about when it comes to the conscious and the subconscious. And these next three paragraphs pretty carefully spell out the role of the subconscious. So I'm going to kind of move through them quickly and then let's talk about them.
Okay.
The, the first one says the subconscious never fails to express that which has been impressed upon it. The moment it receives an impression, it begins to work out the ways of its expression. It accepts the feeling impressed upon it, your feeling, as a fact existing within itself, and immediately sets about to produce in the outer or objective world the exact likeness of that feeling. Objective once again. The subconscious never alters the accepted beliefs of man. It outpictures them to the last detail, whether or not they are beneficial. To impress the subconscious with a desirable state, you must assume the feeling that would be yours had you already realized your wish. In defining your objective, you must be concerned only with the objective itself. The manner of expression or the difficulties involved are not to be considered by you. To think feelingly on any state impresses it on the subconscious. Therefore, if you dwell on difficulties, barriers, or delay, the subconscious, by its very non-selective nature, accepts the feeling of difficulties and obstacles as your request and proceeds to produce them in your outer world. The subconscious is the womb of creation. It receives the idea unto itself through the feelings of man. It never changes the idea received, but always gives it form, and hence the subconscious outpictures the idea in the image and likeness of the feeling received. To feel a state as hopeless or impossible is to impress the subconscious with the idea of failure. So he keeps repeating the idea over and over again that you don't want to put the wrong stuff into your subconscious mind. And that's pretty clear that he's trying to do that.
Right.
But he also has this other concept going on. He describes it as being outpicturing. And that's the part that I think is the more interesting part of this section. Because when you talk about outpicturing, that to me is him describing the process of how an idea that was created in the conscious mind and implanted in the subconscious mind, the subconscious starts kind of turning the gears, so to speak, to start turning that thought, that impression, that feeling state into an objective reality. And that's why I go back to what I said earlier about how objectivity or the objective reality is directly tied to his idea of the subconscious. He sees the subconscious literally as a way of creating physical reality, which will blow the mind of any theologian because it's just not the way they normally think about it. But it's also how we law of attraction people think about it.
Right. But it's all based upon the feeling. It ultimately goes back to the feeling. And now, do you know if he talks about how does he correlate feeling and belief? You know that one?
I'm not sure what you're thinking of specifically.
Because he more talks about the imagination of it all. In order to manifest something, you've got to imagine it. But, in my mind, you have to believe that it's actual. I guess if you imagine something to be a certain way in your mind, then you have the belief that it could be that way. I don't know.
Well, if we kind of have to go to another one of his books, I think, to explore that in more detail. And it probably takes more time than we've got here to do it. But probably one of his first books, and if you give me a second, I'll give you it. It's Your Faith is Your Fortune. In that book, he talks about faith being based on the primary concept of I am. And this also becomes the basis for his idea of what God really is and what the relationship between God and us really is and how we really are God and we have God power and so forth, which is very blasphemous from most people's point of view or in theological circles. But from our perspective, it's interesting stuff. But for him, I think the whole process of I aming, I'll call it that, the process of saying I identify myself as being and thinking in terms strictly of I am, that to him is the basis of faith. That he says that's just the starting point from which not only we can apply the process that manifests whatever we want to manifest, but it is also the starting point for belief, which is very similar to the Abraham concept. I mean, the Abraham concept is you keep focusing on the thought over and over again, and your belief will increase, right? Your faith that it is true will increase. So it's actually very similar in that sense. The difference being that he starts very emphatically from the viewpoint I am. So I am is really big for him.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that answers your question.
Good. Well, okay. I think that it's in there somewhere. Yeah.
Let's see, a couple of comments. Well, Jamie and Herb have been having an interesting conversation. Jamie says, he teaches subconscious is purely receptive. I pay attention or place my awareness, and that awareness is conducted with my beliefs. That's the feeling. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. There you go. That's a good one.
And belief is a condition. We condition our awareness with beliefs.
Right.
So she's coming out kind of the way you're talking about it.
We do. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Hmm.
Thank you for those comments, everybody.
Good comments, really good.
Yeah. We have an intelligent listening audience, don't we?
We certainly do. I just realized too, I've got a recording issue going on here, and I'm glad that I'm recording in two places.
Oh.
I have to pay attention to something. Okay.
All right. So I'll
Well,
continue reading.
okay.
Okay. So, uh, let's see, where were we? The subconscious, um,
Actually, we're on although the subconscious faithfully serves man. You see that?
because I think I dropped down. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So, although the subconscious faithfully serves man, it must not be inferred that the relation is that of a servant to a master, as was anciently conceived. The ancient prophets called it the slave and the servant of man. St. Paul personified it as woman and said the woman should be subject to man in everything. And that's from Ephesians 5:24, also 1 Corinthians 14:34, Ephesians 5:22, Colossians 3:18, and 1 Peter 3:1. And those are a lot of verses where it talks
Yeah.
about that. I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about it. So the subconscious does serve man and faithfully gives form to his feelings. However, the subconscious has a distinct distaste for compulsion and responds to persuasion rather than to command. Consequently, it resembles the beloved wife more than the servant. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit and talk about how that looks in reality, where it talks about the subconscious would rather respond to persuasion. I mean, to persuasion rather than a command.
Hmm.
So now that's an interesting concept for the conscious mind to persuade the subconscious. I guess is that just telling it something over and over again without like ordering it? I mean, is it in the tone of the voice or I mean, because it comes through as just a feeling. I don't quite
It's
get
an
that.
it's a good question, and I don't know that we can even adequately answer it because we only have a few minutes left for the podcast.
Oh my
But
goodness.
yeah, time kind of flies when we're having fun.
Yeah.
But the closest I can come to an answer is the subconscious always says yes to whatever the conscious mind says. But we also know that this is all a metaphorical treatment. So if we were to metaphorically describe compulsion rather than persuasion, what would be ways to do that? Well, one way to do it would be to understand that if we are, this kind of ties back to the disciplining concept we talked about before. If
Mm,
we are using discipline and we're being hard on the mind and we're being hard on ourselves, that's more along the line of compulsion.
yeah.
Whereas in expressing to things to ourselves gently and respectfully and so forth, that's more along the lines of persuasion. I have a
Mm. Okay.
suspicion that's where he's going with it, but I
Okay.
can't tell you for sure. And
Yeah.
certainly not within a minute and a half.
Yeah. So we should do our ID guess and wrap it up then if we only have a
We
minute
probably
and a half.
should. And we should probably also put our messages out, which include the idea, are you a subscriber? If you're not yet a subscriber, please become one. We'd love it if you would do that, because that way you get all of the podcasts coming directly to your smartphone device. And when you are a subscriber, make sure that you're putting out there on social media, not just in the group that we live stream to, but all the places that we're out there, that you're a listener and that each time that you're listening, share what you're listening and why you liked it and what it is you liked about it, because that's how more and more people get exposed to it. More and more people find out about the Daily Dose of Happy. So please subscribe and share. The instructions on how to do it are, in most cases, most of the places where we have the podcast listed, there are links in the description that you can click on for whatever kind of device you have. If you don't see links, just go to the homepage of our website, loatoday.net, and you'll find links for subscribing for Android devices and for Apple devices and just follow the steps after that. So it's pretty simple. And with that, we're kind of out of time, but this has been good. I'm glad you brought up this subject. Obviously, this is one that we could carry on more. We can even do that next week if you want to. But
Well, I
gosh,
know
this
I'm
is
going
a
to be
bunch of
looking
fun
at it
stuff.
more and more, and it's great that his books are all online because
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's easy to
So,
access, you know.
so good stuff.
So
And at that, we'll say goodbye for now. I look forward to talking to you again next week.
yes, thank you. I'll be over at Buttonwood and enjoying our concerts and storytelling this week and invite everybody to come. You can check us out online at buttonwood.org. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight and sent their questions in, and that was really great
Absolutely.
to get that bigger feeling of conversation with more than just you and I. Although you and I are great, but it's always great to have more people on board.
It
So
really
thanks
is. We
everybody.
love it. Yes. Thank you to all of our listeners. And we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Awesome. Bye bye.